right, welcome everyone. Happy Groundhog Day. I'm so glad that you were able to come, and I understand we have 6 more weeks of pouring rain. Is that good? All right. Well, welcome. We warmly welcome all of you students and community members and staff to the Mahoney Library and to the Arts and Lectures series. So I've been with that Arts and Lectures Committee for many years, and it's one of our pride and joys here at the college, and we're particularly happy when we can have events here at the Harold Mahoney Reading, at the Mahoney Reading Room in Petaluma. So today we're very fortunate to have Shawn Brumbaugh and Marsha Connell joining us together to look at art and science at Peckerwood Preserve. And how many of you in the room have been to the Peckerwood Preserve? Now, what about that? Because people were saying, oh, Petaluma, they don't know anything about Peckerwood. And of course, that was proven wrong immediately. So for those of you who haven't been, this will be a wonderful, wonderful introduction for you, and a kind of incentive. Spring is going to come eventually, and so that will be a wonderful time to go. Shawn, many of you know, is a teacher here since 2005. He has a doctorate in ecology from the University of Texas and brings a wonderfully interdisciplinary approach to his teaching, blending the humanities and the science together. And of course, Marsha Connell has taught for the junior college since the 70s. Her beautiful, beautiful plein air paintings have been featured as part of the annual art trails for many years, and her teaching here and in community centers throughout the country has been much appreciated by students and the community. So please welcome Shawn and Marsha, who will take us on a tour of Peckerwood.
So I'm going to see if I can get away without using the microphone. Can you hear me all right in the back?
Yeah.
I'm used to yelling at people, so. All right, so we'll see if we can do this without the microphone. Now, I'm going to talk briefly about this bridging of science and nature, or science and art together, more from a science perspective, because that's really my background. But I'd like to start off by acknowledging my parents. I grew up in a household that was filled with little natural curios everywhere. My dad is a biologist, and when we would look at these things, he would tell me something interesting about the organism. And my mom is an artist, and she would typically comment on how beautiful that structure was, something that spoke to her about that object. And so pretty early on, I developed this appreciation of this relationship between art and science. And on the walls of our house were displayed some of these scientific illustrations of marine invertebrates, and that was common art in our house, and that's what I grew up with. And so from this, I really saw that really there wasn't much of a separation between art and science, that the two complemented each other. So that's one of the things I'd like to focus on. I would also like to kind of end my talk with really emphasizing that not only is this this nice relationship, I'm going to go over some of the history of scientific illustration and its role in science. But I'd also like to kind of take the flip view of this, and it'll kind of tie into the things that Marsha's been doing. It's that by teaching our students how to sketch and how to illustrate and how to paint, we, in essence, are making them better scientists as well. So, all right. So, this is a horrible illustration of the scientific method. I got this from one of our general textbooks, general biology textbook. Every general biology textbook has a diagram like this. Now, don't read the fine print. These are the basic steps of the scientific method. Starting with observation, and from observations come questions. Typically, what we want to see is we want to develop observations about the natural world that helps us ask questions about the natural world. And from these, we can develop hypotheses, which are kind of tentative explanations. And then we would conduct some sort of experiment, generate data that we can analyze, and then hopefully come to some sort of a conclusion. Now, when I ask students, what is the most important step in this process, they will oftentimes go to kind of the glitzy part, which is the analysis. the results. But I really want to emphasize it's observation. Observation is the single most important part of the scientific method, because this is what draws us to meaningful and insightful questions about nature. If the quality of the observations are poor, then everything else is going to be poor following that. And my experience has been the best scientists are those that have this unbelievable ability to detect patterns in the world that go unseen by many of us. And they're the ones that are directed to the very insightful scientific questions to pursue. But it all comes down to this idea of observation. Now, as a biologist, I am drawn to looking at details and patterns in the natural world at many different scales. So we can look at the fine details of a single organism. So the mouth parts of a butterfly, the eyes of a fly, the flower stigma with pollen attached to it, and then even different types of pollen grains themselves. There's all exquisite detail and features in biological structures. We can even scale this up to just looking at the whole organism, looking at form and function, behavior, and so on. All kinds of exquisite details in all kinds of organisms. We can even scale this up even further to kind of more of a landscape ecological view of looking at the interactions between different organisms in their environment. So this is the Grand Prismatic Spring in Yellowstone. And each of these different colors, at least the oranges and the yellows and the browns and some of the light greens, those represent different species of bacteria that have adapted to very specific micro conditions in those hot springs. So there's patterns in nature everywhere. We just have to observe them. Now, as a scientist, as a naturalist, it's really important that we document these, because these observations are data. Data then which we can look back on and try to make sense of what we're seeing. So, documenting natural history. The methods of documenting natural history primarily relied on sketches and illustrations. So this is actually from Meriwether Lewis's journal. As they were going westward, actually I think they're already in Oregon at this point, noting this unique fish that had never been seen before. And he has very specific instructions from Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson wrote to him, "Your observations are to be taken with great pains and accuracy, to be entered distinctly and intelligibly for others as well as yourself." Because for Thomas Jefferson and for Lewis and Clark, this wasn't just an expedition about geography. This was a scientific expedition to try to understand and document the natural history of the western portion of the continent. So, there's a long history of this, going back at least 25,000 years. Humans were using sketches and paintings to document what they were seeing in the natural world. And so this is, these are some cave paintings of different color forms of horses that were found in this cave in France. And actually, there's an interesting sort of note to this, that there was a study that recently came out which compared the DNA from the fossilized remains of horses found near this cave with modern-day non-domesticated horses that are still running wild in Asia. And they actually determined that the different color forms that were represented in these paintings were the actual forms of those horses, and they weren't some abstract representation. So these people were actually documenting what they were seeing. It wasn't an abstract interpretation. Now, many of the illustrations that have been used really are celebrating the complexity and the diversity of life. And some of my favorite are Ernst Haeckel, who is a famous evolutionary biologist. And he had a whole array, a whole set of scientific illustrations, which he referred to as the art forms of nature. And here he's showing kind of the glorious forms of all these different types of hummingbirds. So not only kind of talking about the complexity of each of these, but also kind of celebrating the diversity of all of these different forms. And he clearly takes pleasure in their arrangement. This isn't just scientific documentation, this is art. He has other ones. This is another one of my favorites, where he looks at copepods. Copepods are microscopic aquatic organisms, little invertebrates. And clearly, even just in the arrangement of how he's putting them out there, he sees this expression as a form of art. Now, he was particularly taken with organisms that displayed symmetry and organization, as he has kind of exquisite details in his individual organisms. Now, you have to remind yourselves that this is an era before cameras. There is no other form of documenting these organisms that can be widely distributed to others. One of my favorite bird illustrators is John Gould. John Gould was a well-known, if not the most established ornithologist in England in the mid-1800s. And he made over 3,000 different prints of birds from around the world. And this is actually showing the great-chested bird of paradise from New Guinea. He was actually instrumental in helping Darwin make sense of the birds that he had collected on his voyage. Before, Darwin really didn't know what he was looking at until John Gould told him what he was looking at in terms of the type of birds that he had collected. Unfortunately, John Gould was so successful in the displays of his images that he had a big exhibit at the Great Exhibition in 1851, and people were so taken and so moved by his illustrations of birds that it led to this really unfortunate fashion trend in Europe in the Victorian era, where hats were actually ornamented with all kinds of bird artifacts, feathers, feet, all the way up to the whole bird. And this was decimating bird populations, especially exotic birds that were somewhat rare to begin with. Does anyone know what ultimately this led to? This fashion trend led to a major environmental organization. The Audubon Society. To prevent the use of birds for this sort of ornamentation and for their conservation. Now, these sorts of illustrations are also really important in documenting change that has happened over time. So this is thought to be the best representation of what a dodo bird looked like. There are no photographs of dodos. There's no complete skeleton of a dodo. Our whole concept of what a dodo looks like is taken from paintings, and this is thought to be one of the best by this individual, Ustad Mansur, who was kind of a naturalist painter for this emperor in this region of India. So we can get a sense of extinctions that have occurred from organisms that were portrayed going back centuries that no longer exist today. More recently, this might, John Audubon's painting of the ivory-billed woodpecker is our best representation of what ivory-billed woodpeckers look like. It's thought that they're extinct, they're native to the southeastern forests of the United States. And there's thoughts that there may be a couple out there. If you happen to find one, there's a $10,000 reward. But so far, lots of effort has been put into this, and no one seems to have been able to document clearly any living ivory-billed woodpeckers. But this is the best representation that we have of these. We can also use some of these early paintings to look at vegetation changes that have occurred over time. So Albert Bierstadt has some fabulous paintings of Yosemite, one of my favorite places. And in this painting of Yosemite Valley in, what do I have here, 1865, he shows a valley that is fairly open, mostly grassy meadows with occasional trees throughout. If you were to go to this area today, and I'll show you an aerial photo, so here is Sentinel Rocks, Cathedral Rocks, and then El Capitan. Kind of from an aerial view, looking down at that same area, we see this today, an area that's completely been filled in with trees. And so ecologists use this sort of information to try to understand what have been the mechanisms driving the change in vegetation. And so these old paintings are data that we can use, in addition to being important artistic expressions. Okay. So let's go on to observations at Peckerwood Preserve. Peckerwood is a place that fosters the tradition of bridging art and science together. Peckerwood Preserve itself, if you haven't had the fortune of visiting the preserve, it's a large preserve. It's run through the private foundation of the Peckerwood Preserve Foundation. It's over 3,100 acres, situated in eastern Sonoma County with some of the best views available in the county. It's host to a variety, actually a very diverse assemblage of different types of vegetation types. Each different color here on our map corresponds with a different type of vegetation. So just to give you a glimpse of some of this variation. So this is Mount St. Helena in the background, and then separating the valley between Mount St. Helena and where this picture was taken, it's Knights Valley. And we see there's an assemblage of many different woodland types. There are open grasslands with spectacular wildflower displays. So this was a particularly robust year of lupine blooms. There is coniferous forest, both Douglas fir and redwood forest, along with riparian zones and ephemeral creeks. And there is mature stands of manzanita for kind of designating spectacular stands of chaparral. It's a wonderful place to observe, to get out and explore and observe. Now, in 2009, a team of faculty at Santa Rosa Junior College partnered with Peckerwood Preserve, namely Steve Barnhart, who I would like to acknowledge, who is present here. He's retired faculty from SRJC and the academic coordinator at Peckerwood as well, recently retired. So we partnered along with UC Extension to create the first pilot program for the California Naturalist Certification Program in the state of California. And from this, we developed two courses, Bio Earth Science 85.1, which takes place in the fall, and Bio Earth Science 85.2, which is a spring class. The fall class emphasizes kind of the physical components of the preserved natural history, and the spring course focuses on the biotic components. And each week, a different instructor will lead the class in his or her specialty. So here is Steve Barnhart leading the class on the glory of wildflowers, the identification and ecology of wildflowers. We have Nick Geist from Sonoma State University, who is a very rambunctious individual and will lead students all over the place in the search for amphibians and reptiles. So here he has a northern alligator lizard. And they're trying to look at the very close features that would allow the students to distinguish, is this a southern alligator lizard or a northern alligator lizard? I wasn't paying attention. Well, right. We have a week where students are encouraged to explore the aquatic invertebrates. An essential component of this class, I would say the main feature of this class, other than being out in the field observing, is documenting it in a field journal. And so here students are not only required to give a detailed narrative of their observations, but they're also required to include sketches and drawings. Some have actually even included paintings that they pasted into it. Now I've noticed that from my involvement in this class, that's oftentimes our most enthusiastic students, and some of our best students are those that have already come from an art background. They already have the skills in how to observe. A lot of our students are those that came from Marsha's class. And they'd been exposed to Peckerwood Preserve through her courses, and they wanted to learn more about the preserve and more about the natural history. And they already had a gift for how to observe the landscape. So, again, we're asking students to observe from at different scales. So this is one of our students who is sketching some of the different insects that were collected during that day that we're exploring the ponds. And in the margins and around these organisms are scribbled all kinds of fabulous details about those organisms. To do this sort of work requires, and I think Marsha will talk about this more, cameras allow us, pictures allow us to capture something. Sketching allows us to understand it. It helps with our understanding. We engage in a relationship when we have to do this sort of work. Here's another student's work looking at sketching out different species of grasses, and then also plotting and marking where those grasses occur in a meadow, and quickly by her color chord. It's actually a beautiful image in itself, but it kind of gives a glimpse into patterns into where these different species of grasses are located in the meadow. And then we can ask questions about why. And even scaling back further at a larger landscape level. Even simple sketches with a little bit of color can be used to convey lots and lots of information about the natural history. So this student has used different shades of yellow and gray to denote grasses. And the gray kind of show old dead grasses. And as this student comments, these are situated on the south, kind of the hotter south-facing slopes. And the trees, the vegetation, the wooded vegetation is kind of isolated, almost hiding on the northern slopes, which are cooler. And so these are patterns that you can begin to interpret the landscape with. Okay. So this brings me to the end of my portion of the talk. And it's really this emphasis of allowing ourselves time to sit quietly and to observe. I think it's more important now than ever in this electronic age, where students are, their world has become this and not this. And we need to give ourselves time to just sit and look and process. We don't have to go and seek nature. Nature will come to us if we allow for this process to take place. And in doing this, we become better naturalists. So at this point, I would like to hand over. I would like to just note that one of the reasons that Marsha and I first got to know each other because we saw the importance of actually sketching for our students and helping them understand what they were looking at. And so we asked Marsha to come into our class and to lead a week on landscape sketching. And it's been immensely useful for our students. So, thank you.
While they're setting up, I want to remind students that when you leave, you should be sure and pick up a notice for your attendance today right at the end of the table. I think many of you already have.
So, can you hear me okay? Yeah. So one of the pleasures of being involved with Peckerwood Preserve has really been to find these connections that I've had with science, with the scientists. And I love to go out with Steve and with Shawn, and we take students out and they're all spread around like the last image that he was showing. And I've watched Shawn take a deep breath and just smile and just be happy that the students are making a connection by just being there and drawing. And somehow we have all found that the observation is also in being in nature has solace. And I think that that's something that we have really shared. And so I just want to acknowledge the connections that have happened cross-disciplinary between us, and they wouldn't have happened if we weren't going out together. And it's been a great pleasure. And I got introduced to Peckerwood Preserve through an organization at the junior college called the IEE, which is the Institute for Environmental Education. It was a faculty and staff kind of ongoing group and committee that introduced the idea of environmentalism in many ways and sustainability and environmental classes to the junior college curriculum. And we had a lot of adventures together too in the beginning, going out together for weekends and just exploring different ways of experiencing nature. And then at the same time as Shawn did his project to develop the Bio Earth 85 class, I did a project and wrote a grant proposal to the Peckerwood Foundation to do a project to learn about Peckerwood Preserve through landscape painting and through that practice. And that's how my involvement deepened. And it's led to a really wonderful long-term relationship with Peckerwood as an artist in residence and also as a teacher. And you're seeing some of the results out there, and one of my promises was, besides making art there, I would teach there, and I would also continue to tell people about Peckerwood, and I continue that promise. And I would like to invite you now to join me to discover the landscapes and seasons of Peckerwood Preserve. So imagine that your feet are on the trail, and in your hands is a sketchbook, and a soft drawing pencil or a pen, and your paints and easel are ready to set up. And I invite you to look over my shoulder, through my painter's eyes, and consider also, how might you respond to these places that we're going? This is my first painting I made in the spring poppy fields near the house called the Bechtel House. And I decided I needed to become more familiar with the preserve after that by hiking and drawing. And so I filled a sketchbook with drawings and naturalist notations and reflections. And my drawings are studies and often a warm-up for painting, though they're not usually complete plans for a painting. So the paintings kind of take place as I paint them. I haven't decided each part of them before I begin. So I began to look more closely, and I followed signs of seasonal change in plants that might have been there when the Native Americans inhabited this watershed and hills. When I did this, the intense shedding of acorns was just over, and red, orange pyrocanthus that you see here, although not in color, are bright notes in the gray-green chaparral. Above the barn, around the observatory, and there's a hint of their color in the valley between Turtle Pond and Mount St. Helena. And as you can see, I put a lot of notes on my pages of my journal so that I would remember my experiences and note them just like the naturalists are doing. And so some of what I'm going to share with you today are going to be readings that have come from my sketchbooks. The fall season touches introduced plants. At the McCann homestead, there was an old apple tree with small fruits still clinging, a spindly pear like this with overripe fruits underfoot, several sprawling fig trees, a few intact figs, and a number with bites, wondering who's taking those bites. And since I first discovered them, they've set up nighttime cameras and discovered, as they suspected from the SCAP studies, that there were bears who were eating bear. And now we have some pictures of them. There was actually just in the Press Democrat this weekend an interesting article about nighttime cameras that have been set up at a few different preserves, and Pepperwood was mentioned in that. Did anybody see that? Mm-hmm. And a dwarf pear is wearing golden pendulous ornaments in the late autumn light. I also tasted while I was there because I wanted to engage my senses. And now my sense of touch. Overlapping hills grew from rubbing a pencil over the board of an old picnic table. And we call that frottage, like collage and assemblage. And it comes from the French word to rub. And the shapes became a view seen from the Bechtel House Ridge. There was crisp sunshine at 1,000 feet where Peckerwood is, but down in the Santa Rosa Plain there were tendrils of fog between dark ribbons of land. And this is another way to make those kinds of layers, graduated values to make atmospheric space made with soft pencils with a varying pressure. And here is a way to make atmospheric perspective and color with brighter colors in the front and more contrast, becoming more subtle and grayed and less contrast as it goes back. And that's a traditional way to create landscape space. So I'm speaking now as the art teacher who would try to introduce to you, how do we do these things? My own approach is painterly, which is that images form through the movements of the brush, moving like grass, sweeping like the wind. For me, watching and listening, trusting intuition and gesture infuses my representation with an abstract sensibility. This was a quickly changing landscape with fog lifting on a cool summer morning. Some mornings we would go there when I've taught landscape painting classes for 3 weeks, and we would go there early in the morning and you couldn't see anything in the summer. It was completely fogged in, and then you'd watch the fog start to lift. This was a watercolor that began on a foggy morning that cleared as I painted. I wonder if I'll see a mountain lion. That would be awesome if edgy, but they are there. This is the sun setting into Turtle Pond, the place that you saw people with waders on in Shawn's slides. Weather drama. Snow predicted above 1,500 feet. I think you saw in one of Shawn's slides Mount St. Helena with snow on it too. Bird sightings in an updraft of changing weather. A red-tailed hawk watching from a snag takes off and swirls below. Near McCann Homestead, a marsh hawk flies low over the canyon where willows grow. A flock of turkeys parades at Bechtel House. Now, one way that I build the sense of luminosity that watercolor painters do in other ways is called making glazes, where you layer one color over another. You could also scumble color over, which is putting a little bit thicker color over an undercolor, and you can build layers of that. And it builds a kind of luminous surface that's different than just putting the color on one time. It also can evoke a place of some mystery, a place of the heart for me. And this painting is called Dissolve 3 Tree Hill. It's the one that was on the poster, and it's on loan from the Doyle Library collection on the Santa Rosa campus. And when the show is over, you can look for it on the 4th floor near the reserve desk. And this is another evening. A different color palette is evoked as the sun sets. This is Skylight 3 Tree Hill. And you can notice that as the colors change, it also is showing different ecosystems. Just like that map that had different colors for different ecosystems, and it shows in an artist painting. I search for views of Mount St. Helena with snow. Some winter days, the heavy sky is too low to even see the mountain. But this sunny day, there was snow on the mountain and wildflowers underfoot. So in the front, those purples and whites, those are wildflowers. Through a camera viewer, Mount St. Helena shrinks in proportion to everything else. But it's not how I experience it. And my drawings are expressing how the mountain is really filling my attention. So some of these you're seeing pages from my sketchbooks, and some of my sketchbooks are in the cabinet over there, but you can only see one page at a time, so this is taking you in a little deeper. Golden maples below, that's where the golden trees are, and a backdrop of Mount St. Helena looks so much closer than the usual views that I have from Santa Rosa and Sebastopol. So I set up for a few hours, but almost every time I set up, first I tromp up and down the hills. And I have to kind of take it in through my body first before I paint. I also dance. Some of my dance friends are here. They understand. What colors convey the feeling of that late autumn grassland? Well, it's not exactly golden, or not exactly lavender, and not exactly brown. And it's starting to show a little green underneath, like Shawn was showing in that one drawing with colors layered over each other. Maybe some of each. I don't find a need as an artist for me to match the colors precisely because I'm more of an expressionist, but some exacting notes feel important here. The matching and the asking, the comparing help to deepen the seeing. I'm always asking what the painting wants and balancing it with a searching observation of the actual landscape. This is a pastel that I did as a study for the next painting. I stand back for a better perspective on my painting, and a late afternoon gust whips the canvas sideways. I have it strapped to the easel. I've been here before. But my palette goes upside down in the dirt, of course, like buttered bread. And the light starts to fade quickly all of a sudden, and I fold up. Plein air painters have to build and take down their outdoor studio at every session. It's a lot of carrying things around, or schlepping, as they say. Cézanne made over 60 paintings of his Mont Saint-Victoire in Provence. I often call Mount St. Helena my Mont Saint-Victoire. Or my Pedernal, in honor of Georgia O'Keeffe's Pedernal. She called this her mountain. Or my Mount Fuji, in honor of Hokusai's 36 and then 100 views of Mount Fuji. I was just remembering a poem I wrote about Sally Baker's watercolor and thought about Mount Fuji sticking up over a colander. A persimmon it was, right? Leonardo da Vinci drew to understand and record his observations. One of the earliest artist-scientists. The structures of plants and humans and inventions. I do the same as well for the pleasure of the process, to discover what the drawing wants to become. Sightings. In the barn, Beth is mounting a very long rattlesnake skin, curved to fit on a board, shed exactly where I was just going to paint. She said it was a healthy rattler, as often the skin is found in shreds, but not to be concerned, the rattlers are hibernating now. In the summer, when I taught a 3-week class, the rattlesnakes were livelier. They must have been curious about my students' paintings, or grateful for the prolonged shadows that we cast. We had a couple of interesting encounters. I've learned to really be calm. Somebody has to be calm when your students are going like this. That was exciting, wasn't it? Here, can you see Mount St. Helena at the very top? There's a line behind that tree. So it's another view of Mount St. Helena, but it's barely visible behind a giant oak. And I drew this tucked into a steep hillside on a deer trail, almost in the arms of an ancient guardian, with a dark view of its inner chamber. Perhaps it's a survivor of the Calistoga fire of '64 that swept through the preserve. That's another piece of our history. That was a fire that went from St. Helena to Santa Rosa. A lot of my pages look like this with just writing too. The yellow leaves have mostly dropped from the maples. They feel like the strong, dark maple and O'Keeffe's black maple. Toyons are still bright with berries. I want to know the life cycle of the cactus and looking at the white ceanothus at the edge of the road. Then I made repeat visits to one site for a seasonal painting series. This is number 1, Winter Solstice, Peckerwood Preserve. And we had a scientist, Katie Gerber, who demonstrated first to a few painters how the angles of the sun were going to change. She held different sized balls and moved them around to demonstrate how the angles of the sun were going to change the length of the shadows as the year went on through the seasons. And this was a project that was initiated by one of my former painting students, Bill Gittens, who, after he took my landscape class a couple of times, he then took the Bio-Earth 85 class, and he's now a Peckerwood steward, and that was his project as a steward. And he invited me to come and paint with him, and a few other people. The painting of the same spot, it's near Double Ponds on the preserve, is called Vernal Equinox. And I was going to paint the ponds and how they changed in size and got smaller and smaller as the year went on. But I kept noticing the shadows that were coming from the trees, and I thought, well, that's going to be an indicator to watch also. And also the way at this particular site where it comes down and there's a diagonal, there's a wet place at the bottom, and I wanted to watch how that was going to change as it connected between some of the ponds. So I decided that that was what I was going to watch out for as I did this series. I also had a coyote walk in front of me as I was trying to figure out which space to go, and I decided coyote had marked the spot, so I chose that. One morning, I hiked up Roller Coaster Hill. I concentrated on the steep slope, the destination, the darkness, the rhythm of my boots and breath, and an occasional dance with trees. These are the centuries at the bottom. I'm interested in how the view changes as I follow the trail up and across the ridge line. Light falls on gentler slopes as I climb, and there's dark woods behind. I look down into canyons and up over tree tops, and suddenly the mountains are nearby, and around the next bend, what's going to be there? My eye will not hold still like a camera lens. Here's the first Zen view. I'm looking for Mount St. Helena. And here she is. Her majestic robe spreading catches the edges of eastern light. Then I rest at the top, lying on my stomach, and notice what's underfoot. And do you see Mount St. Helena behind there? Shooting stars and buttercups when I'm on my stomach on the ground seem taller than Mount St. Helena beyond. I think about 3 lectures I've heard from esteemed landscape painters. The first was by Alan Gusso, who is the author of a landmark book called A Sense of Place, The Artist in the American Land. And I'll always remember, he talked at Santa Rosa JC many years ago, and he talked about how the cycle of nature led him to make paintings about neap tides and about his compost heap. And I loved him. The second lecture was called The Pleasures and Pains of Outdoor Painting by Terry St. John, and he is an inheritor of the California landscape tradition that was exemplified by the East Bay Society of Six. How many of you know about the East Bay Society of Six? Anybody? There's a wonderful library book about them, and they're expressionist, and they went out together again and again, and a lot of their work is in museums in the Bay Area. The third was 6 Good Reasons Not to Paint a Landscape by Wolf Kahn, who's a colorist landscape painter, and called an American impressionist, as some people call him, and one of my teachers. He's a keen observer, yet abstract in his use of color and simplification. 3 Tree Hill, and artists and astronomers love this location, but it is windy. And I went to some shelter from the wind on the side of 3 Tree Hill and found across from it a complex hillside with woods and vistas beyond. And I went back a month later to take my students there, and I could barely find the trail because it was overgrown. The grasses were now shoulder high. I intended to hike to Turtle Pond one day, but the way was blocked by cows. Some of them were very fierce looking, with long curved horns. And I like cows, and I grew up spending a lot of time on my grandparents' farm, but these were a little intimidating. But I learned that they are gentle and that they keep the vegetation low. It's one of the ways that Peckerwood does fire control. At Double Ponds, the sign to Weimer Flats and the falls tempted. I must remember that a long trek down is more strenuous on the return when you're carrying all your painting supplies, easel, and wet canvases. Photographer Greg Damron took me to Martin Creek, near the site of a former winery, where I painted among a splendid year of lupin and various golden flowers. A painter has the freedom to edit and to emphasize, to stylize, to imitate, to illustrate, to abstract, to evoke, to respond as the facets of the landscape move her. Cathanne Brown derived a similar list from conversations with painters in in one of my favorite little books called Why Draw a Landscape? We think we know what a tree looks like. But I practice this figured round exercise, drawing the spaces, allowing the trees to appear. It bridges a way into painting. The shapes of the spaces between the trees and branches entice me to look through and back, layer after a layer. And that's the feeling of entering this special grove. This watercolor was shaped by first painting the spaces between the trees and behind the rocks. This is behind the Dwight Center. And beginning with space and the colors of autumn, I wove tree trunks into the tapestry of strokes that suggest foliage. I think about color choices in these kinds of ways, that it could be realistic, or tonalist, or impressionist, or expressive. And those are different ways to approach color. I actually made up this autumn color in the summer. Here's an ancient twisting tree and a Japanese rock garden feeling that inspired this painting. And I was curious about models for Peckerwood's programs that were just developing. So I went to when I was on the East Coast, I researched contemporary and traditional landscape painting at the Arkell Museum in Canajoharie, New York, and the Hudson River landscapes, and the Wadsworth Atheneum in Connecticut. And I visited Weir Farm National Historic Site in Connecticut, which is a center for American Impressionist artists, one of only 2 visual art sites in the National Park Service. And I've attended excellent workshops at Peckerwood, and you can too. These are field notes from edible and medicinal plants with autumn summers. The first one we began with was the Peckerwood Tree, which, do you know what the Peckerwood Tree is? The California Bay Laurel. So it requires, as Shawn was talking about, a deeper concentration and observation to draw a plant than to take a photograph. At least most photographs. But I think that the memory stays in your hand and in your body. And the same advantage that cursive writing is said to have over just taking notes on a computer. You know, there's a big movement to restore the teaching that's almost getting lost of cursive writing. And there's good reasons. I do use photography sometimes. It helps me in seeing compositions and it helps my memory, but for me, my most authentic source is direct observation. To draw and paint outside in whatever the challenging conditions, close views and expansive, recording the experience. Audubon, I did hear that Audubon killed birds to study them. Is that true, Shawn?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. I don't even want to injure a wildflower, even though I know it will die anyway and hopefully return another summer. This I painted on my hands and knees, these Mariposa lilies sliding on slippery summer straw to observe closely with my nose in them, but I didn't want to pick them. Pepperwood has been my teacher. As my own professor at Skidmore College, Arnold Biddleman, used to say, if you choose the right thing, it will teach you how to draw. This quiet time, wandering the hills, drawing and painting in one place for hours at a time, prepares a fertile inner ground for musing about life and art. This is one of my summer painting classes, Art 114, and Steve Barnhart is in this picture behind me, who's wearing a dark blue shirt. Your forehead is catching the sun. Here's some of my students out painting. The Peckerwood barn, the windows shimmer reflections of the surround like small abstract paintings. I always like to play with, once I have the shape of a building, you know it's a building, and then the windows are a place that you can make small abstract paintings, but you can still believe that it's a building, and it's so much more interesting to me than just making a black hole. So it isn't always exactly what I saw, but I take it from where I've been. And if you move around, you know how windows do wonderful reflective things, so I look for it. And here's somebody looking in an artist's window. That's Bill Gibbons, actually. So teaching landscape painting at Peckerwood has put me in my favorite classroom, with the natural world as my partner and the additional pleasures of interdisciplinary collaboration. This year, I'm going to be teaching shorter workshops, such as this new spring retreat at Peckerwood Preserve. It's going to be at the end of May, and there's going to be dinner served, and you can spend the night. And if you want to take something longer, my junior college art department colleagues do teach excellent semester-long art classes, and I want to recommend them. I'm also going to offer a class this summer at the Mendocino Art Center, and I keep a mailing list if anybody is interested. And it's going to be at the end of that table. There's a piece of paper that asks you to sign your name, if you would like. The plein air painting has become, in the past decade, a large part of the American culture of painting. And last year I went to a conference in Monterey, and there were almost 1,000 people there. And I went the summer before to the Adirondacks and painted with 100 people in the Adirondacks. Mostly I don't like to paint with that many people, but it was interesting just to feel the energy of what's going on and the enthusiasm. I also just want to thank Jane and Herb Dwight and the Pepperwood Foundation for what they have done to save this open space and for supporting creative research. And I think that I should just end, so I'm going to conclude. I've been inspired by Helen Frankenthaler, who, when she painted this painting called Mountains in the Sea, she said she had the landscape in her arms when she painted it. And for me, I think I have the landscape in my body. I've been walking it, dancing it, breathing it, sleeping it, eating it, and now I listen to it, digest it, color it moody, meet it in a new language that we learn to speak together. We mirror each other, doors open to the inner landscape. So thank you for coming today, and we hope that you, our companions on today's journey, and our students will be inspired also to pursue creative work at Peckerwood and scientific learning, and to protect other wild habitats and open spaces also. And now we're open for a few questions. I think we have just a little time, so thank you. And then I invite you to stay and look at the exhibit, and I'm happy to chat with you out in the exhibit area. But I'm bringing Shawn back, so if anybody wants to.
And I would also like to add, we have a couple members of Peckerwood staff who are here today. So Sandy Funky and Margaret Boger. If you have questions about the preserve,
yeah, could you stand up?
They would be. So. Thanks.
So does anybody have any questions or comments that you'd like to offer right now?
So has it been affected by the sudden death?
It's present at the preserve, but it's not widespread yet. I mean, Steve Barnhart has a better sense of the spread of it, but I don't get the sense that it's spreading much.
Well, the tan oaks quite a bit,
Yeah.
but they're very locally distributed. The live oaks, you get it here and there, but nothing real bad yet.
When you're choosing color, Marsha, is it mostly important that you match the tonality and not the hue? Is that kind of how you approach things?
Yeah, and I think I start out with some of the hues that I see there, and then I want to bring the painting to its own life, and so they start to ask for other colors to come that are related to what I've seen, that you could call the tonality, but sometimes I don't want to observe the traditional kind of recession, for example, so I want it to be more flattened, and so I might keep things the same intensity. Those are some kinds of choices. And sometimes I want to keep the energy energy of how I started the painting, that kind of searching energy, and not get it too tightly completed. So I'm working from a more modernist approach than an illustrator, or than somebody who is a photorealist. And they're all beautiful ways to work, but it's interesting to see what the kinds of differences are.
Do you work in mixed medium? I saw watercolor, pastel. So were those oils, acrylics, the other?
Most of the ones that are here are oils, but I also paint in watercolor, and I also do pastels. And I'm going to be a pastel celebrity artist this summer at the Mendocino Paint Out in September.
Oh, nice.
Which is open to anybody who wants to come and paint.
I just wanted to make a brief announcement because following the show that we have up now is going to be a very, very interesting collection of botanical illustrations by artists who have been going down to Alcatraz and carefully documenting the plant life on Alcatraz. And of course, Alcatraz has been settled for over 150 years, so, and gone through many different iterations, identities. So please come back and you'll be able to see up close. This was actually sponsored by the National Park Service. You're going to be able to see up close some very important botanical illustrations.
Oh, and I should mention that at the end of the table there, where there was the list that you could put your name on, we made some copies of plein air painters reading list. And you can see, you know, we are in a library, as, and Sammy, who is sitting near Dr. Chung here, she, thank you for coming, has put a lovely display of books there, and I made a compilation of books that I give to my students and that are in my collection. So you might enjoy that, and if we run out, maybe we can make some more copies. Sure. We didn't expect there would be such a wonderful trend. Should we, I think that our time is up. Okay. So, thank you so much.